Hey, all viewers and listeners, welcome to another episode of Pathways to the Ivies. Today, on our episode, we have the brilliant Nav Agarwal, who has actually not made it to one, but more than five Ivy League schools. His admits range from Stanford, University of Pennsylvania, Berkeley, Cornell, Dartmouth, amongst many others. His profile is completely around sustainability, and his major at Stanford, which is the admit he's clearly going to accept, is in Earth systems. On this episode, we're going to debunk everything that Nav did and how he built an entire profile around sustainability, how he continued to do things from when he was only 12 years old, rarely keeping anything in mind about college, and how his profile led to coming where he is and how it ended up getting him in Stanford. Now, welcome to the show. And I am so honored to have you over. And, thank you so much for taking out the time to discuss with our listeners and viewers about your profile. How about you go and talk a little bit about yourself? What do you do? What your passions are outside of the college standard elevator speech?
Thank you for the introduction. Very kind of you. My name's Nav. Obviously, I'm 18 now. I'm from Delhi. I study in the Shriram School, Malsari. And honestly, I love sustainability. I love wildlife. I love nature in just general. And so it was a natural path for me to take. Apart from that, I'm just really interested in finance, in sports, and in just developing and building organizations.
That is wonderful. Well, that's a pretty diverse profile, and I actually have your resume on my phone. It took me like a good 30 minutes to just go through your resume. So I don't know how much we can fit in, but we'll try to cover all major aspects. What we'll also do is leave your Instagram ID and your email ID in the description, so that in case if somebody wants to reach out to you, they can just drop a DM or like email you, and I'm sure you can answer them. So let's first start with the academic bit of it. Can you describe your HLs and your SLs in your IB? And what was your predicted score like for those? And why did you choose those HLs and SLs? What was your rationale in it?
My HLs was econ, business, and English, and my HLs was math AA, ESAS, and Hindi. And the reason that I took these HLs was because I knew, apart from my academics, I had a very busy extracurricular life. And so I also wanted to take a mix of subjects, which was easier on the load, because as a whole, IB is a very competitive program, and the difference between one HL and one SL does not make as much of a difference compared to the amount of hours that'll save you in terms of the extracurriculars, and the amount of effort you can put there. And so that was a very important point for me, was to make sure that I had enough time for my extracurricular activities, and to ensure that that also runs smoothly. And Again, the reason that also I didn't take, let's say, a math in an HL level versus an SL level was because I actually had gone to the US and had a conversation with an admissions officer at MIT. And I had asked her the same question before I was choosing my IB subjects: was, is it better to take HL math AI or SL math AA? And contrary to popular belief, it's actually better to take math SLAA because it has more calculus. And since it has more calculus, colleges actually give more weightage towards calculus based subjects. And that also obviously gave me an advantage in terms of lesser hours I have to spend on the subject, less papers I have to do, and get the same, if not more, benefit than the HL students when I'm applying to an Ivy League college. So that was one of the other points which I think is, which I wanted to mention. And also, again, I didn't want to take the easiest subjects. I still decided to take, let's say, econ or English HL, just so it challenges me a bit and also shows a bit of academic rigor. And so that was the way that I was able to develop that mix.
Wow.
And my predicted was a 43 on 45.
Wow. I think you brought up some really, really good points. One of the conversations that students come and have is, or take the hardest subjects possible. And while it is great to take the hardest subject possible, you have to understand that IB, being the rigorous curriculum that it is, you really need to bring that balance in, that even if this is hard, it is doable for you as a person, just because it's hard. But if you don't get the score, I think let's spin it this way. If it's a hard subject, but if you're going to get a 5 on that hard subject on 7, it's better to take a slightly easier subject which is not as rigorous. Like if math AAHL is far more rigorous than econ HL, clearly. So it is rather better to take an econ HL and get a 7 on 7 than take a math AAHL and get a 5 on 7. Did I spin that right?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Better to get a 7 than a 5. But and if if you can take a hard subject and get a 6 versus an easy subject and a 7, then maybe you can choose a hard subject. But again, if there's a 2 point difference, then it should be a no brainer to take the easier question, the easier subject.
Perfect. That's actually nuggets of advice, because people just feel they should take everything hard, and that demonstrates the rigor. And while the rigor is great, if the points are not going to come through, it's simple. If you're not a 43 on 45, one thing is very clear: Stanford or any other university is going to throw your application through the door. Do you agree with this? Like that 43, 40, or 45 is important for an Ivy League?
Yeah, I think definitely first round of screening is academics, and so if you don't even make that cut, they don't even read your profile, and so really, really important to just put yourself into the door. And me as a personal candidate, I knew my extracurriculars were very strong, and I knew that I just had to have my foot in the door to be considered, and then become a top applicant. I knew my academics would never be at the level of a top applicant, so I ensured that at least my foot was in the door and people would read my application, and that's what I think was able to give me that little bit of an edge.
Wonderful. How about testing, like, SATs, ACTs? That's another question that keeps on popping up. Some schools are test optional, some schools are test mandatory. Some just say, hey, we can just, if you send it along, we will get it. You also have a UC admit here, which I see, which is Berkeley. So, what's your take on that? Did you take the SAT? Do you recommend taking the SAT for students who are wanting to go to these top schools? Do you think it's an important data point?
So, in terms of how important it is, I think it's absolutely crucial, especially next year onwards, since almost all schools are becoming test mandatory. And more as AI advances, the influence and impact of essays becomes less and less. And as the US is anyways trying to become at least steer itself more towards a meritocracy. I think it's even more important that your SATs and ACTs are at a good level. But while saying this, there's also a bit of a caveat that I actually went test optional in most of my colleges, and the reason for that is I gave my first attempt, and I wasn't really didn't have enough time to prepare for my second attempt because it was right in between my exams, and I wasn't able to time it correctly. And because of that, I actually had to go test optional in almost all schools, and I wasn't able to apply to colleges like Harvard or Princeton since they were test mandatory. So it was an opportunity which I lost out on because I wasn't able to time the SATs correct. I think maybe at 10th grade or before 10th grade is a great time to start your test preparation and get it over with before you get into IB. I made a bit of a mistake by starting it in the 11th. But overall, I think that if I did have that component, the SAT and ACT component, I would definitely have gotten better results and been able to also apply to more colleges. So it was a limiting factor in the application for sure. And yeah, it's just really important, and I completely regret not being able to do well in them.
That's fantastic. And I think a very important point you brought up in this is starting your test prep in your grade 10 and not waiting it out until the summer between the 10 and 11. This is the most common error that I've seen a lot of parents make, right? They start thinking about SAT between the summer of 11 and 2, like between the summer of 10 and 11. The summer that is there, you usually have about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on, which school, where, whatever. That's the time people dedicate to doing the SATs, right? Like learning the tricks, the tips, the core curriculum. And then when the IB school starts, that's where you're actually starting the practice, which is ridiculous because at that point in time you're going to be so much into workload and kind of pulled in different directions. If you start this a little early, meaning somewhere in the middle of your 10th or even early 10th grade, finish your prep and possibly utilize your summer between 10th and 11th to do your test, to do your mock, to probably give more time to yourself. Then I think scoring also becomes very very easy, because at the end of the day, multiple tries to SAT doesn't hamper your application. What does hamper your application is not hamper, but you would have, you stand a definitely a better chance to get to something if you have that SAT score, as you rightly said. So I think great points, and thank you for letting people know. Let's go to a very very important part of your application, which is your Yale Global Scholars Program. This is a summer school that you attended. Can you let us know what's the process, like why Yale Global Scholars Program? Is it one of those most competitive summer schools like RSI, which I know is very very competitive? How does YGS work? And you know how do you kind of what's your experience like over there?
Right. So I think, like you mentioned, there's a lot of very good summer programs and ultra competitive summer programs. There's a RSI, there's MNTSI, you have your Penn programs as well. And the problem with those for me was that I was more of a humanities kids, and they were more STEM focused or math focused programs. And the other programs which I saw were available for, let's say, like sustainability or business or politics, economics, law, were all not competitive programs, and so you just had to really pay and you would get into those programs. And so YYGS was one of those only programs which I found which were actually competitive, as it had, I think, a 15% acceptance rate or so for the humanities per se. Apart from, obviously, they had one line for STEM, but majorly was also for humanities. And so the reason that I picked this summer program in particular is because I honestly feel there is no use in going for a summer program which isn't competitive. Because at the end of the day, colleges don't really care that you've gone in, you've paid for some program and you've gone and you've learned X, Y, and Z. They want to know you've gotten into a kind of competitive program and you've excelled in your summer program, because it's essentially mirroring the way college life is supposed to be. And Yale was an absolutely exceptional experience for me. The kind of people I met there, the kind of exposure I got there was amazing. And I've made so many good friends since that time, and I'm still being able to keep in touch with them. And very interesting data point actually, which I wanted to point out in YYGS, was that almost 90% of my friends have gotten into a top 10 school from Yale. And it's absolutely surprising to see that almost everyone who goes to YYGS ends up at a very, very good university. And so it's also, I think, a very good sign if you get into that program, that you probably will get into a good university in the future. A few tips, if you do end up going to a summer program like Yale, is to really try and push yourself. So for me per se, I did the speaker series, I did the talent show, I went out and for the capstone as well, I really pushed my team and pushed myself and ended up winning the capstone as well. And so trying to do as much as you can with the possible resources you have there is also important. And you can demonstrate that to your colleges as well, that hey, look, I got into this very selective program, I met these amazing people, and I ended up doing this as well in the program. So it shows a clear line that you are someone who gets into these universities, and does perform well and improves the community around you. And I think that's an important aspect to try and do in your summer program.
How about the application to YYGS? Like I know for something like an MNTSI, or even for that matter RSI, they do give a lot of importance. Like generally speaking, the trend is towards, if you have a good SAT score, you do get a good chance of getting into one of these programs supported by your essays and all of that. Does YYGS also have a requirement of submitting your SAT scores besides the essays? Like as you said, it's only a 15% acceptance rate. So how can a student who's wanting to apply maximize his chances of getting into YYGS?
So I think a few things are important to note. One is that I actually applied in ninth grade and I had got rejected. And in ninth grade, my grades weren't the best since I hadn't done my GCSEs yet. And I believe that was probably the biggest factor which led to my rejection. But then once I did my GCSEs and in my 11th, I ended up applying in 11th, and had around a I think 39 on 42 was my internal assessment grade. And so I think that was what pushed me towards getting that acceptance. So academics are important. I would say most of the people I met there had very good academics, but most of the people also had a spike. And this is what I've also seen in the top colleges as well, is that each person has something about them which you relate them to. So if I think about Nav, I think about sustainability, for example. Or if I think about my other friend, I think about philosophy, for example. So that one person is very interested or very well versed in that one specific topic. And what that does is, I've seen, my brother's right now at Stanford, for example, and meeting his friends and stuff. I've noticed that how these universities don't want to build a class of 100 people who are very good at everything, but a class of 100 people who are very good at one thing and very good at one specific topic. And so you have that group of people who are amazing at every field and in every industry.
Perfect. So, two very important components. One is having great academics, because even if you have the best profile, academics, not having academics is 100% reject. And secondly, having a spike, one theme to your application, something that you really relate to, and not just from the perspective of college applications, but just generally that you yourself associate with, right? Like it could be sustainability, it could be pet care, it could be women empowerment, it could be anything, right? But that's your thing. And then accordingly picking a track at your college or summer school as well that aligns to it, and writing essays that are you, rather than using fancy terms or coming up with something where you're like, oh, I'm going to open a Webster's dictionary and find out the fanciest terms to write the essay. No, just a representation of you. And I think that's what will get you. And of course, a prestigious summer school, definitely pretty much, there is a trend, not just YYGS, right? People who usually make it to RSI also end up getting in a Stanford, also end up almost getting in an MIT, right? So it's a very known thing. Even MNTSI, I was talking to one of the students last year, and he was telling me that about 90% of the MNTSI batch actually gets accepted, or eventually finally transitions into one of the Ivies. In fact, Penn, including Wharton, is very, very open to the idea that, oh, if this person made it to MNTSI, most likely this person has the ability to even, go and pursue, an actual undergraduate course at Penn. So those are some great pointers. Let's come to your main theme, which is the sustainability. The largest piece of your application, which I read on your resume, is is when you were a founder of One Step Greener. This is something that you've been doing since February 2018, which is almost 7 years ago, and that was certainly not a time you were preparing for your college applications. So walk me through this process. How did you decide to open this? The activities that you've done as a part of this. How did it impact you as a person and your college applications in general?
So this organization was started post the Ghazipur fire. So there's essentially a landfill called Ghazipur, and there was a fire which happened, and two people ended up dying, and school was shut for 2 weeks. And my older brother, who's 3 years older than me, is asthmatic, and so during those weeks, he was actually admitted to the hospital because of the air pollution coming from that dump site. And post that, I realized that our waste from my house is going to that landfill and then contributing to asthma. It's contributing to air pollution, just contributing to my brother's asthma, and now he's in the hospital. So then we decided that we should really stop sending waste to the landfill, and we decided to segregate waste at home, for example. Again, we realized that the government would come, they would mix up the waste and then send it back to the landfill. So what ended up happening was that we had around maybe collected all of our dry waste in our household for maybe 3 to 4 months, and our grandfather one day came and said that it's either you or the waste in the house. It was a small mountain in the backyard, and then we went to some recyclers and they said, look, for you guys maybe 100 kgs is a lot, but we need a minimum 1,000 kgs or 2,000 kgs to even accept the waste. And so we use the mom's WhatsApp group. We message some neighbors here and there that, can you guys please send us 10 kgs, can you send us 5 kgs of dry waste, can you just send us your waste. And so in the first week we got around 100 200 people to send us waste, and we had enough waste to then send it to the recycler. Me and my brother thought this was more of a one time situation, But surprisingly, those 100 people came back to us saying that, can you do this next month as well? And that's when the idea came that instead of just making my home zero waste, why can't I make India zero waste? And that's when the organization started, and we formalized it into an organization called One Step Greener. And the way that our process works is, we have education, so we teach people how to segregate, the importance of segregation. And the ways that we do these talks is we collaborate with people in colonies. So I'm sure that you'll have a friend in, let's say, X locality, and you'll have a friend in Y locality, and their parents would be able to host a small gathering in their house, where you just invite maybe 20, 30 people from that area and give them a presentation on waste management or whatever topic that you want to talk about. And then we used to get them signed up on the spot. And by signed up, I essentially mean we had our own EV vehicles. And the way that we started in terms of capital was that for the first 100 homes, we actually charged a 200 rupee fee for 12 months. And that gave us enough room to be able to rent a small 1,500 square feet setup and one truck, one driver for 2 weeks. But we had taken the money for a year, that we'll give you a service for a year. So again, a lot of risk that we took in the starting. We took the money, and we were able to, in the first 2 weeks, get it to 500 ohms. And so once we reached 500 ohms, we were able to basically break even at a unit level. And so we didn't really need any more fees coming from our customers. And then once we reached that level, the way that the our process works is, once we pick up the waste, we take it back to small segregation facilities, where it essentially gets collected, and we send it to a larger facility, which is obviously, the whole supply chain is owned by us. And we'll have so right now, in terms of workforce, it's around 95% women, who we employ from the informal sector. So it's, your rag pickers, your kabadi walas, who don't really get that type of formal employment. So giving them, let's say, a bank account and a Aadhaar card, a fixed salary, ESIPF, things like that. And then segregating that waste at source, baling that waste, adding some value to that waste, and then sending it to recyclers. So that was the way that the process worked. Um Now we've transitioned into opening up our own factories and our own recycling units. But that was the journey. Essentially, it started from taking money from people as a service fee, and then starting it, and then bootstrapping it, and then getting revenue in the business. And it stayed as a non for profit throughout. And we never really ended up making any money, but it was always close to break even or break even. And the remaining funds, we got awards for, we got CSR funding for, and we were able to recoup that, whatever that loss was. Apart from the waste management aspect, the organization also does a lot of tree plantations. We realized that, if we want to combat air pollution, waste contributes to around 30% of that in Delhi, for example. But there's another 70% which I haven't been able to solve or tackle, and that 70% can be tackled by forestation. So we started very small. By very small, I mean we had a small park which we took from the government. We asked them for permission, and we planted 500 trees. And we fundraised that through crowdfunding, through social media, and were able to build a small mini forest. And then once that model was working, we started, 10xing our goal every year. And so for example, last year we planted 50,000 trees in a forested area, and we raised CSR funds for that. This year we're planting 500,000 trees. So, the way that also we were able to do that was having small steps in the starting, that you start very small and perfect a model, or get a model very close to perfection, and then scale and replicate that model, which really worked well for us. Again, in this process for me, I went from a very shy, young 11-year-old kid to someone who's, not afraid to talk to people, talk to adults, talk to government officials. And there was so many things which happened within the organization, so much exposure I got. I would either be speaking to a government official who's screaming at me that this is not being done, this is not being done, or I'm speaking to a household who's a customer who's saying, you've missed our pickups for 3 times in a row, we're leaving your organization. Or dealing with laborers or workers who've who've had a fight or something or the other. So it's just, a range of experiences that you get as a person, which really helps in building your worldview and your understanding of people as well. Because, I think everyone who's seeing this podcast is going to be coming from a privileged background. And it's also very important that, you understand and experience those places as well where you don't see that privilege, or where you don't have the benefits of that privilege. And that's also important in the college application process, especially in interviews and things like that, where your empathy really plays a big role. So that was really the process of the organization, and the way that it impacted my college admissions, I think, was quite, it was a quite important piece in my application. In terms of impact, we've been able to recycle around 1.6 million kilograms of waste till date. And we've saved hundreds of millions of liters of water through that, planted more than 60,000, 65,000 trees now. And we've been able to full time employ more than 130 people from marginalized backgrounds and things. And so, another thing which I would like to point out in this project was I never wanted to do it for college. And because of that, I think admissions officers were also able to see that this was a real, genuine thing he's doing, not just because he wants to get into college. I had hundreds of my friends who were applying this year who had projects they were just doing for college. And I think admissions officers just saw through that. If your organization is, let's say, just education on a random topic or on a specific topic, and just leaving it at that, I think they can also understand that you're not really doing it because you care about it, but because you want a social project. An advice which I always give to my juniors and people is that if you ever build an organization, or if you ever build an, even for if you're doing it for college, ensure that you can show that it will work when you're in college. By that I mean it should have an ability that, while you're in college, it's running on its own. And that shows two things to admissions officers: that shows that you genuinely care about what you do, and that you're creating an impact even when you're in college. And that's something which is, also very important for the top colleges, like, for Penn, for example. If you go and see their admissions criteria, it's about, and even the admissions letter, for example, says that, there's a quote of Benjamin Franklin about how changing the community and making the world a better place, is the definition of students of Penn. And social projects are a huge part of anyone's application, and it has to be done properly in a proper manner. I've seen so many people get into top colleges without social projects as well, right? So there's also a caveat there that if you're a STEM person, more of a mathematics guy, more of a, related to that field, you don't need to do a social project. It's not really important. But if you are doing a social project, do it well or don't do it at all. If you get your social project to a level of, let's say, I'm educating 100 kids, it's better to not even put it in your application. I think that acts more of a negative, than a positive. Just, and again, try to come up with something which is innovative, not just I'm going and educating these kids, or I'm teaching these kids, or I'm doing a donation drive, or I've raised this much money for this organization. Very standard, very basic. You'll get into the top, maybe, the bottom, the top 100 schools or whatever. But if you're really aiming for the top 20, it's not going to cut it, in my opinion. And so that's, a bit of an advice that I have, in terms of these projects.
That is fantastic, my God. I cannot believe somebody who was as young as you thought through all of this. Did you have anybody guiding you on how to scale this up? And I scale, I don't mean in terms of revenue, but just, oh, this should be the next step. Like, start with one houses, then 200, then 500, then also, kind of have trucks coming and picking it up, then have people who are rack pickers. Actually, it looks like a very strategic plan that was put in place. So, I mean, and I don't claim that getting help is incorrect, because you're only what, 12. You're not expected to know these things, but did you have somebody who was helping you in this process in terms of scaling the organization up?
So, what worked for me was that I co-founded with my brother, who's 3 years elder than me. And again, I would say that if you end up doing an organization, it's always better to have a founder who's either 3 years, either younger than you or older than you, simply because when I had exams, he could handle the organization. When he had exams, I could handle the organization. But in terms of a mentor, my brother and me were more just stumbling and trying to do whatever we can. And uh, it sounds very strategic now, but it was completely not like this in the starting, and we were completely all over the place. Still are all over the place, in my opinion. There's a lot more things that we can do better. We always took advice from our parents. So my mother and my father, we always consulted them in terms of things which we wanted to do or what they thought the next step should be. But throughout this journey, we've seen that more people ended up helping us, right? There were obviously a lot of people who didn't want to listen to a 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, but there were also a lot of people who were willing to listen and help as well. And whether that was helping in just signing up, or giving their waste, or even giving advice, right? It was really about opening doors, and we were able to unexpectedly get a lot of awards as well, which further boosted the organization and was allowing us to get to those next steps, because it not only motivated us but also gave us, let's say, financial capital for us to expand. So a lot of grants and awards. Again, another thing is that to verify that your project is good or is something which is has an impact, it's always important to get a few awards at least for your organization. So I would really, for college per se, I would say it's very important to apply for regional awards. So you have Promerica, for example, emerging visionaries. You have Diana Award. These are the basic ones. You have Rise. You have United Nations Volunteer of the Year Award. So these are some awards which I think colleges know are reputable, and give you that sense of authentication on your projects as well. That yes, your project is actually there, and you're not just saying it for the sake of saying it. Again, that's also very important to do, is ensure that you apply for awards and grants, as many as you can. It just really helps the organization grow and flourish. Yeah.
Absolutely. And how do you find these awards and grants? Because a lot of people have this question that, oh, I'm doing great work, but is there like a platform, a couple you just mentioned, but is there a platform, or, how do you know that I would be the right candidate for this? There are all of these awards out there. And then as an international student, you are also qualified for it, because sometimes a lot of awards and competitions are not something that international students are qualified for. So how do you go about finding that out?
So the way that it worked for us was that in our circle as well, we knew a few seniors who had got, let's say, the Diana Award, and so we had just applied for that. And there was another award, the Earth Action Hero Award. Those were our two first awards in 2018. And once we won those awards, we had made, let's say, like a community of people there who kept on applying and getting awards. And so through that community itself, we kept on understanding, okay, there's this award also, there's this award as well. And we started learning as we were going, essentially. And that's the way that we understood that these are the awards which we should apply for, and kept on applying. But there's now repositories online, right? If you search, let's say, your NGO, your niche. So if I go to sustainability NGOs awards in India, I'll get a list of, let's say, 100, 150 awards which are very good. Put that into, let's say, a chat GPT, and ask them that, you're a college admissions officer, which awards do you think are the best? You'll get a list of maybe, and tell them to rank it, for example. It'll rank the best awards, go through them, and whichever ones you like, just start applying. I think it's very straightforward to really apply for awards. Not too difficult. Once you make, let's say, a repository of all the questions and answers, you can, like, fill out 30 applications a day without problem.
Wow. So, I mean, it's another thing that you debunked as a part of this is you mentioned that it's not so hard. A lot of people look at these awards and like, oh my God, I don't think I'm going to make the cut. But it's not as hard as it sounds. It sounds fancy on the resume. It gives attestation to the fact that you've done good work, but it's not so hard. Like once you have all the answers together, it's pretty much a copy paste job, and you just keep applying. And hope that if you're applying to 100 awards, at least two or three pick you, And I think they will if you're doing good job, if you're doing a good job. So I think that that's great to know. Another thing that I'd like to definitely speak about is your Nobel Peace Prize laureate award. That one stood out big for me amongst all the awards. Tell me a little bit more about it. Like, I believe it's a very prestigious award, so just walk me through that.
So this was the International Children's Peace Prize, which we won in 21. And me and my brother won it together for our activism journey. It was previously the person who won it before was Greta Thunberg, and then before that was Malala in 2011, before she got the Nobel Peace Prize. And applying for the award, like you said, I was, you're really thinking that we should not apply. There's no reason to apply. We're not going to get the award. And that was literally the feeling that we had up and until the final interview, right? We were like, why are we doing this? It's a waste of time. We're not going to get this award. You get 100,000 euros as well with the award. And we were, really thinking about not applying at all. But it was again, our mother who pushed us, saying that it doesn't matter if you don't get it this year, you can apply next year. And so she really pushed us to end up submitting that application. We got to the final interview, and we got to know that we were winning the award, and it was, just crazy, knowing that me and my brother were in shock for at least a week and a half. And we had so much news covering us. Almost every newspaper post the award. Every newspaper had, like, the award mentioned. And it was a very it was a very motivational moment as well. Shri Kailash Chaturthi ji, who's the Nobel Peace Laureate from India, actually gave us the award as well. So it was just one of those moments which I guess I won't forget. And to, a lot of people, that surprisingly, the International Children's Peace Prize gets not as many applications as you would think. And the reason for that is because their application process is very long. And almost every International Students Peace Prize awardee I've known personally, 50% of them who've applied for undergrad have gotten into Yale, and I think 30% of them have gone into Stanford. These two colleges in particular, in my brother's application file, when he read his application file post admission, he also saw that the International Children's Peace Prize was highlighted in terms of his application. It was also, mentioned in my admissions letter from Stanford, that Nav Agarwal, that, there's an admissions note that the officer gave, and he mentioned that one of you was the International Children's Peace Prize winner for an environmental NGO in India. So I think it was one of those awards which is very important, but also not that hard to apply for. In terms of the, how tough it is to get selected, it's not that tough to be in the top 50, and the top 50 is also a very big deal. I've known a lot of projects at a very small scale who've been able to get to the top 50 level, or even the top 30 level. And that again is a really good point to add in the application point, because it still shows that you've got to that stage. And it's very good that way. You just need, it takes a lot of time to fill the form, and so less people end up applying. But it doesn't really have such a low acceptance rate in terms of the top 50 or the top 30. So that's something which definitely a lot of people can make, and it would help them out a lot.
Wonderful. Just digressing a little bit, you mentioned your brother's read his admission file. Besides the Peace Award, what else was highlighted so that people know, because he's made it to Stanford. So, if somebody wanted to make it to Stanford, I'm assuming you've not read your file, but he's read his. So I wanted to know, if people can see what were the things that were highlighted on his application.
So, honestly speaking, apart from the Peace Prize, some of his impact figures of the organization was there. Again, something which I would have a word of caution for everyone is that don't brag in your essays. Don't brag at all in your essays, especially if you're applying to Stanford. I don't know how true this holds for other, people, but we had, let's say, some external help in terms of the essays for my brother, and they were, trying to push the fact that you should mention that this is the amount of um, waste I've recycled, and I met the president of India, and I did X, Y, and Z, right? Stanford had actually highlighted that and written, might be bragging question mark. right? And that was something my brother didn't really want to include, but as an external force, he was told to include that. And again, that's a point which I would mention, is that people might be telling you one thing and they might be experts in that field, but they can also be wrong. So if you have a gut feeling that, okay, I know what I'm doing and I think it's correct, maybe you should stick with your own gut. And don't really brag in your application file. That's one thing which was highlighted. Apart from that, there's a few components which Stanford grades you in, and the scoring, etc., was given there. So one is intellectual vitality, which is how curious are you to learn, and that's graded from a scale from 0 to 5. So 5 being the worst, 0 being the best. And then you have your school rank. So how good of a school is your thing, and that's again 0 to 5. Most schools are at a 3. Select schools in India, maybe I only know of two schools which are at a 2 in terms of rating. And those are the two factors. And then the third factor is extracurriculars, which is your ECs. And the fourth criteria is academics. So again, graded from 0 to 5. I don't necessarily know the weightage of these different components because it wasn't mentioned in his application file. But these are the main components at least Stanford looks for in a admission, right? That you have all of these different things, and that you get admitted if you have a overall average score of either 2 or 3. So you have to be at that level, and at a 3 you might be a waitlist as well, a defer, and 4 will be a waitlist, and 5 is a rejection, for example. And that's the way that it normally works. And I also saw, my brother saw that there were two readers in his application file. So there's two people who will end up arguing and thinking about your application and then presenting it to the committee. So again, another point to mention is that you have to win over your admissions reader in the starting. Ensure that they really really like you, have those specific points that they can latch onto, because in the admissions committee, the maximum amount of time they'll get to speak about a person is maybe 2 3 minutes. And the admission committee sits 2 months or a month after they've read your application file. So your admissions officer, normally what they'll do is they'll read your application file, they'll create a note where they'll write a little bit about you and why you should be admitted, maybe 3 bullet points max. And from whatever they can memorize or remember from those 3 bullet points, they'll present to the committee. And so you need to ensure that those 3 bullet points you're very clear about and what you really want to mention and put forward. So when the admissions reader reads those 3 bullet points, they're able to present those 3 bullet points in committee very strongly, right? Because the application is around those 3 or 4 bullet points. Um, in my application, I did a lot of things which weren't, I did like maybe 15 20 different things. And I actually only ended up including in my essays, in my main things, only 2 or 3 things. My activity list though had 10 things. I ended up only really talking about 3 or 4 things, again towards that bullet point perspective, that even though you're doing so many things, maybe it's more important to focus on those 2 3 things and ensure those are well communicated in your essays and in your common app, in your letters of recommendations as well. When you're giving a brag sheet or when you're asking someone for a letter recommendation, ensure that those 2 3 points are mentioned and that they advocate for points which you can't advocate for. That you can't personally say that I'm a very kind, humble guy who's very empathetic. That is something only the LORs can really say for you. So that's also something which you obviously can't write a LOR, but when you're, let's say, doing an internship or doing a research project, you have to show that to the person that you're going to ask the LOR from. You have to show that you can work hard, you can go to office early, you're the first one to come, last one to leave, for example. That, for example, if it's put in your LOR, the school knows that you're hardworking, right? You don't really necessarily need to say that you're hardworking in your essays. So that's, I guess, another point from which people can understand. Yeah.
So I think from what I understand in terms of your application strategy, even though you have 10 activities to talk about in your activity list, focus your essays on one or two or three major things that you would really want to highlight about you, which you think define you as a person, not necessarily the college, you as a person. The application is about you. It's not about going to Stanford or MIT or Harvard or whatever, right? That's first. Secondly, in terms of LOR, have a very clear strategy on, um, what you would like to demonstrate, whether it's empathy, it's team spirit, it's collaborative learning, and act like that. Because you are not, when people say I am collaborative, when I tell that about myself, I'm collaborative, nobody's going to hear. But then when your school counselor tells, or possibly, your internship manager tells that he was an extremely collaborative learner, he was always there to help, very diligent, those things speak volumes about you. So while you write black sheets, only things that are true can be picked up, because nobody's going to write things about you that are incorrect. So also have an LOR strategy to some extent, and really trying to bring those points out, so that when you kind of write that in your black sheet, the reader or the person who's going to write your LOR is going to relate to it. Oh, that's right, I agree that Nav is empathetic, and probably I should put this in the LOR. Does that sound like a plan? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I'm saying that, obviously don't try to be fake,
Of
as
course.
in that, okay, I have to be hardworking, so I'm going to do this. Don't do that. Genuinely try to show that, whatever specific thing you're trying to show, focus on, just try to show that as much as possible. And yeah, essentially, yeah, you've pretty much nailed it. Yeah.
Perfect. We're going to talk about the last two things. One is your internship at Terry. Wow, that's fantastic. Terry stands for the Energy and Resources Institute. I have two questions for this. Number one, how do you get an internship in Terry? Because in India, unfortunately, we have to be 18 years to get an internship. We're not adults. So if and of course it could also be from a position of, oh, I knew somebody, or somebody in my family knew somebody. But what happens to somebody who knows nobody, right? How do you go about doing it? And what was your internship experience like at Terry in general?
So the way that I got this internship was I was actually a keynote speaker along with the director general of the Energy Research Institute at an event, and so I had met her, and we had kept in touch, and we were doing some work together in terms of research, and I ended up reaching out and then getting that internship. So it was more of, just again, I put myself out there, went for events, went for networking events, even though I was a very young kid, and that played to my advantage. Everyone wanted to know what is this kid doing here in a networking event, and what is he talking about. And so, go out as much as you can, possibly specific to whatever theme that you're focusing your application on. If it's sports, go towards a sports networking event or a sports. Just there are a lot of events which keep on happening, conferences. Go for those conferences. It really helps you build those partnerships, get those connections. And generally, if you're, let's say I'm focusing my application on sports, I'm doing that also because I'm probably more passionate about sports than sustainability. And that also means that post college, that is something I'm most likely to do. And therefore it's always good to have those connections, whether you're going to college or whether you're not, right? So it's anything I would suggest that you can do. In terms of other internships, anyone who's watching this, if you guys want to do an internship or volunteer with One Step Greener in my organization, you can always do that. We have a big volunteer and internship program which we offer to high school students, and even undergrads and college students as well. So that's always open. You guys can always message me about that and be interested in that. Apart from just that, just try to reach out to people. I think people are very open. LinkedIn is a very good tool. I started operating LinkedIn when I was around 13, 14, and it's probably opened more doors than anything else. Just messaging, cold messaging people who I wanted to meet, who I wanted to talk to, get internships from, get stuff from. Just go out there, message them, and so many people are willing to help, right? So that was something which worked really well. Choose your dream, dream job, your dream company, you want to do an internship for, and just go and do it. And my internship was for around 2.5 weeks, and it was under the director general's office. So I handled all of the research for them in terms of raising, let's say for example, I was raising funds for one of their institutions. I was researching on an oil zapper technology. I was working with almost everyone, different departments in the organization. And then I ended up actually, through this internship, I wanted to keep it very flexible. In the internship itself, I realized that though Terry is a research institute focused on environment, and it's probably the biggest in India, and is very well known, that they themselves don't do waste management or recycling. So I really diverged from my internship, which was supposed to be a research internship, towards more of actually implementing something. So I ended up making that whole campus and their whole institution start waste management and their processes, and get their approvals and then start pickups from one step greener. So trying to see, just don't really try to fit in terms of your internship. Okay, your internship is XYZ, try to do something else as well. I always ask for extra work. I would always finish, they would really not, since I was young, they didn't really trust me. I was like, someone random who came to the internship office for like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, and I was unpaid as well, and so no one really took me seriously. And so whatever work I was given, I would do, but I would also ask, people around me if I could do their work. So if there was someone who was sitting next to me, I'm like, I'll do your work. Why don't you guys take a lunch break or something? Because of that, I learned a lot more about the organization, and people were able to give me very well. They were able to give a very good response towards, the director general when I left my internship, and it really left a good mark on the organization. I think when I left, um, I got an email from a lot of people from there, saying that they had a great time, and we're still in touch. I'm still in touch with a lot of people from there. So I think it's also about trying to make those real connections with people when you do an internship. Just don't go there for the sake of doing an internship and getting that stamp on your resume or your CV or your college application that I've done an internship with X, Y, and Z. Also, try to get an internship without the help of connections, because what that really leads to is that you get a very general standardized LOR from, let's say, the chairperson or the chairman or the president, who you don't personally work with, or you who don't personally know, right? And that never really plays to your advantage. It's better to get an LOR from, let's say, a manager, than the CEO if you've spent more time with the manager. It's more important to get a letter of recommendation from, let's say, a teacher who knows you very well than the principal, right? That's again another point which I would mention, is that though connections, I've seen a lot of my friends use it. I've seen the people who are able to get better results have those really genuine internships.
Perfect. And I think a very important point that you brought up is the superiority or the rank of the person writing your LOR is far less important than the person knowing you and really understanding your element, that this person's really worked hard, they're empathetic, they can vouch for you, rather than somebody who's possibly the CEO or the founder but barely even knows what they've done. The rank will not play any influence in you getting in. The content definitely will, and somebody who can write good content is possibly somebody who's worked for you, not somebody who's sitting high up there who has no idea about you existing amongst thousand interns out there, or maybe more. So that's that. One last thing, can you talk to me about, very briefly, about your research in pollution plastics and the global trade in garbage research under Professor Matthew Gordon? How do you get that? What was the research about? And yeah, all the good stuff about it.
So, I never really signed up for any of these research portals or these, research fellowships that you have online. I basically made a scraper which would scrape all of the professors from all the top universities, so Yale, Penn, Stanford, and I just got their emails and their names, and their, what their thing was, and I made a generic cold email, and I think I emailed maybe like two and a half, not two and a half, I would say like 250, 300 people, professors. And essentially, what professors want is not a collaboration with you, but they want data. The problem you see that researchers have is that they have enough people to work with, have enough things to do, and they have a lot of ego themselves as well, that they're at the top of their field, especially in these universities. They're the best at what they do, right? And they don't want to be working with a high school student who can't provide them anything, who can't add value to them, right? And so the way that I always pitched those emails was that, I run this so and so organization, I really love your work, I have a lot of data in these sectors, and I was wondering if I could help contribute in that. And so what ended up happening was, so many people actually ended up reaching out, hi, I want data for this, I want data for this, because there's such a lack of data which I had access to firsthand, because I was running an organization on this specific thing, that I was able to get those reaches and those connects to people, with a high success rate. And so what ended up happening was that a few professors from Yale and Stanford reached out, and we got on calls, I gave them data. They added me in their appendices, for example, that this person has helped me get this data. And that is much more, I guess, for me it was a much more it was much more for like authentication and proof, because my research paper, I mean, not my research paper, but my name in a research paper is published on a few Stanford websites, for example, or a few Yale websites, and I'm applying to those same colleges, right? And so I can always mention in those that I worked with this professor in this college and I gave him data for X, Y, and Z. And so what ended up happening was that there was a Yale professor who, again, before this, I just want to say that these top university professors will not really ever work with you in a, together in a research project, but they'll always take data from you and add you in citations, etc. But they can help you connect to other professionals, other professors in their thing who might be willing to do that. So a Yale professor, actually, one of the head of the sustainability schools, connected me to one of his students who's a professor at Paris School of Economics, who's Matthew Gordon, and we ended up doing a research together using AI and ML to find out illegal waste dump sites and predict where the next waste dump sites would appear. And so we used geospatial data to create 3D polygons and vectors and get mappings for the coordinates, and then use a predictive algorithm to do that. And so it was me, him, and three other professors. So one professor was from Yale as well, assistant professor from Yale. One professor was from Oxford, and the other professor was working as an assistant under Matthew Gordon. So it was all of us working together on that research project, and it's still under completion, so it is not finished yet. But again, that was something which I think has much more weightage than just doing a research with one professor on a topic which the college knows that you probably figured out through a fellowship or through an internship, or through a connection or something. I think again they can really snuff that out and figure it out, if it's being real or if it's not authentic. So my three pieces of suggestion is, reach out to professors that you genuinely like. Email them, don't be shy to email them and message them. And you can, even if they don't reply to email, I pestered a few of them on LinkedIn. They ended up replying and getting on calls. And the third thing is, for research in specific, it's quite important for most top colleges. They put a lot of emphasis on research. And if you don't have great academics, or if you want to boost up your academics, it's always a good place to start from. Um, so those, I guess, would be my 3 points.
That's great. And I think one of the things that you also mentioned, which I loved, is rather than saying I'd like to do a research with you, you said I could be of value add to you. That's when you started getting response. Nobody likes to respond to who, can I collaborate with you? Because they have like, I think 1,000 emails a day for people who want to work with them. But when you say, hey, you know what, I can be a value add for you. I can find you the data sets. You can scrape the data, whatever. I don't know how you actually ended up getting the data points, but you said I can be a value add to you. That's when you heard. And when people feel that somebody else is here to genuinely add value, they are more open to work with you than just saying, hey, I want to collaborate with you, especially when they have no idea who you are. You're existing in some other part of the world, just existing. They don't even know you. They don't even have a face to put to your name. So it's that.
Yeah, exactly.
One last question. Any mistakes in this journey? Anything that you regret, or anything, even if you don't regret, any piece of advice or couple of pieces of advice for all your juniors who are entering this journey somewhere midway into the journey, and anything that they should be cautious about, because it's a really, really, really long journey starting ninth grade onwards, and you have so many things on your platter. The 4 years just fly by, right? And things that you wish you'd have taken care of, known earlier, had somebody advised you. Probably you had your brother, so maybe I think the scope of advice would be less. I mean, scope of mistakes would be lesser, but just generally for anybody you think observing your friends, they could do better or be vigilant of.
So one thing I think is a common misconception, and is that you have to, let's say, have a 45 on 45, have a 36 on 36, or a 1600 on 1600, or 1550 plus. But what I noticed, surprisingly, was that out of all the toppers in my school and all of the ones who got the best grades, they ended up having very, average results in terms of college admissions. And the people who I saw who had, the 42, 43s, or even, a few 45s, who had something which was, again, unique about them, was really gave them that edge. And so what I would also do is that, myself, I wouldn't really put that much pressure in terms of my academics, which I was putting earlier. um, I realized much later on that, building yourself as a more, I guess, again, a spiky type of person, helps a lot more in the college application process. And it's really about just getting your foot into the door in terms of academics. Because once you get to that 1550, 1520, and there's another student gets a 1550, they aren't really looking at this student got a 1520, this got a 1550, so the person with a 1550 will admit them. That's basically probably never the discussion which happens. The discussion probably happens that, both the students have done well in the ACT, but this student started this non-for-profit which was able to raise $100,000, and this student has been able to, fund research for cancer survivors, and was, and their parents was, had stage 2 cancer, for example. And so we decided to take this person instead of that person. It won't really ever be on academics per se that they decide between X person and Y person, but they will definitely, have a bar which you have to surpass, right? So, don't overkill your academics. And that is something which I noticed in my friends as well, is that they were trying to, let's say, ensure that they get a 45 and 45, even if that's working, um, extra 100 200 hours on just improving 1 or 2 points, right? That could definitely be spent somewhere else, and that won't really help in your college application process. Same with an SAT and ACT. You get a 1530, 1540 plus, you're in the top application pool of any of these Ivy colleges. You're at least, going to be seen, right? Your application will be seen. It doesn't matter if you got a 1580, 1600, 1600, sure. 1580, 1570 and all, honestly, I don't see much of a thing in it. So don't overkill your academics. Keep your academics to a very high standard. Just don't go crazy, right? Second thing which I made a big mistake on was, again, not doing the SAT ACT. That really needs to be done before 10th grade. Time it correctly. See how your summer is working, because summers are very important. Utilize your summers, utilize your summer holidays and your winter holidays from ninth grade itself. Try to do as much as you can, because it's the only time you'll get free time post, ninth or 10th. If you're taking IBDP, for example, there's literally no time to do anything else apart from, maybe a few ECs and your, IBDP, right? So you can't really add anything new. So any addition which you want to do new has to be done before that, in my opinion. So research, internships, and all of those things. And for people, I guess, in seventh, eighth, and ninth, honestly, don't really be that worried about college. I think it's too early to be worried about college. Enjoy life. And then, ninth onwards, sure, colleges look at your application, but even Stanford, for example, doesn't look at ninth grade academics, right? So, enjoy life. I would say don't get too bogged down on, college applications. It's, you anyways end up where you're supposed to be, even if you need to transfer anything. So I don't see it as much of a, again, I'm speaking from a point of privilege since I've gotten into these top colleges. So I don't think I should be the one, speaking about, where you end up and if it's fair or if it's not fair. But honestly, see what you want to do in the future and see if colleges, which college works for you, right? Because you don't really need to get into an Ivy to do what you want to do or be the best at what you want to be. And the whole process is also very draining. So, just if you are committed, make sure that you give your 100%, right? Because you don't really want to be looking back at your application and saying, I could have done this, I could have done that. So I guess those are the few mistakes which I guess I had made, and, hope that you guys don't make.
Great piece of advice. I think I love the idea, and especially the first point that you stated, that a 43 is no different from 45, a 1530 is no different from a 1550. Don't stress it out. I think this entire idea of getting a 1600, getting a 45 is so innately Asian in its nature, We're so competitive that we think a 93 is different from a 94. But when we look at a global scale of education, There's a bar, like a 15-20 intellectual guy is the same as a 15-80 intellectual guy. Seriously, if you're above
Yeah.
1500, you have what it takes to get there. It's just that you had a bad day, or there was a concept that you fumbled on, or whatever. It's not going to impact the application. What is going to impact the application is the quality of work you put in. I know so many people. This is something that I was talking to one of the students from Harker, which is a private school in San Jose. I mean, it's in the Bay Area, and it's super private, and like it's one of those really expensive schools. So Harker's fees are almost 65,000 dollars a year, and everybody who gets from Harker always mostly ends up into one of the top schools. And I was talking to this student, and a very very, he's also a founder, and we were just generally talking at a founder level. And he mentions that, what, when he actually is going to Stanford, and he told me that, while you see the academic paradigm of everybody at Harker, there were people who are far far academically better. Like, he had a 15-20, somebody else was a 15-80 or a 15-90, or even for that matter 1600. There was somebody else who had like the perfect US schools academics. But what kind of showed on his application was his love for culinary interests. His entire Common App essay was actually on cooking, and his
Wow.
entire Common App essay was trying different dishes, and how he had actually kind of done an internship with a Michelin star chef, and how he approached him, and how his life revolved around food. And that's got nothing to do with academics. Yes, I'm not saying he didn't surpass that benchmark, but his passion shone through his kind of shone through his application, rather than saying, okay, there was somebody else. So when he got his admit from Stanford, most people were surprised he got into Stanford, while a lot of top applicants didn't make it to Stanford. So it's a great point. After a point in time, you're all at the same level. Do what matters to you and what you really believe in, and what's important to you, like, what defines you as a person. That's far important than just doing something because you have the privilege. People really really see through it. So I mean, great pointer now. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. If you have any last words, this is a good time to share. Otherwise, I am so happy we brought up so many points, and I'm sure I still have a lot of questions to ask, but I don't think we're going to run over time. So maybe if somebody needs anything else, they'll reach out to you. But any last words now?
Honestly, it's an interesting process, the application process in college itself, and you change a lot, and you learn a lot about yourself. I think in this whole process, I learned so much about me as a person, and the different things, especially the whole essay process, etc. So, just be yourself. Don't get too pressurized with school, academics, or peers. Very important not to get influenced by your classmates and your friends. Just keep your own path. There was so many of my friends who said what I was doing was wrong, or that why are you taking your social project forward, right? You've got to this level, might as well stop and just focus on academics, for example. But again, just listen to yourself, and if you're passionate about something, go ahead with it. And yeah, just follow your own course, and don't take it too seriously. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much now for your time. I truly appreciate it. And thank you for, being so open about all the things that you did, all those little pointers where you brought it out. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this episode soon, as soon as it's going to be released, are going to actually, you're going to have a lot of emails. I'm pretty sure about that. And knowing you, and knowing how much helpful you've been, I'm sure a lot of people will love, you know, to learn from you. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate your time now.
Thank you so much for having me.